Hey guys, so the 80s were weird. Okay, so this past Sunday on July 30th, actor and comedian Paul Reubens died of cancer. About 6 years ago, they found a tumor in his brain. He had the tumor removed. For the past 6 years, he's been dealing with cancer. He didn't tell anybody, and he died. And the exact form of the cancer, the exact type, hasn't been released. So I'm going to be talking about Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure. Now, I actually had planned on doing this movie a while back, and I started doing the research and working on it. It's actually one of the first movies I was going to do. This may sound like, oh, you're just doing this, saying this now is convenient. Well, I have a little bit of proof. I'll show you. So here is my notebook that has appeared in my videos before, and on the very first page, you'll see Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure in my chicken scratch. And to show that this is actually that notebook, you'll see that in other pages, a few pages in, if you see that, you'll see New Jack City. So it was actually the first movie I planned on reviewing. So why didn't I review it? Well, doing the research for it, looking at the production, looking at the history of it, it was a whole lot of information. And also this movie meant a lot to me growing up. Every movie that I talk about and post a video of, it meant something to me. If it's a movie from the 80s or 90s, it meant something to me growing up. Even the ones who were making fun of it. So I know I've made fun of Only the Strong. I've made fun of New Jack City, but I like these movies as much as I make fun of them, and they meant something to me. So this one meant a lot to me. It meant so much. I had this movie on VHS, and I played it constantly. I've played it so much that even though I haven't watched this movie, and I would say well over maybe close to 2 decades, if you were to play this movie, I would know the dialogue. Like I would just I could just do each character's like lines in the movie. That's how many times I've seen this movie. So I was hesitant, but Paul Reubens died, so now I'm going to talk about it. So the plot of this movie, it's actually a very simple plot. Pee Wee Herman, perpetual man-child. He has his bicycle. Bicycle gets stolen. He has to find his bicycle. It takes him on a venture across the country where he encounters weirdos and misfits. That's the movie. That's essentially the movie. So a little bit about the production of the movie, because the plot is there, and that's really all there is to it. So this movie, it was made in 1986, directed by Tim Burton. It is Tim Burton's directorial debut. It was written by Paul Reubens, Phil Hartman, and I'm going to have to look at Vorhall. So there's a third writer. I'm actually have to just look at this man up. Michael Vorhall. Michael Vorhall doesn't have a whole lot of writing credits. He actually wrote for the show Pee-wee's Playhouse, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Phil Hartman, of course, is Phil Hartman of Saturday Night Live and acting, blah blah blah. He was murdered in 1998 by his wife, but he was say, oh, so and so's a comic genius, but no, Phil Hartman was, he was the top of his craft. When they wrote this movie, neither of the three had any screenwriting experience, so they actually got a book on screenwriting. And when you look at the structure of this movie, it is a textbook example of a screenplay. It's exactly 90 minutes. It has a 3-act structure, and each act lasts 30 minutes. So apparently in screenwriting classes, they actually use this as an example of writing a tight screenplay. A little bit more things about the production. Like I said, Tim Burton is his directorial debut, his feature-length directorial debut. Before this, he directed some shorts like Frankenweenie, and Paul Reubens really fought to bring him onto the movie to direct. And he actually has a cameo in the movie as one of the thugs who jumps at Pee Wee, and Pee Wee kind of scared.
Hey man, you're new to this turf. We don't take kindly to strangers coming around here.
I'm off. The score of this movie was done by Danny Elfman. So yeah, when you watch the movie, there's a lot of Tim Burton elements to it. Some of the special effects, some of the color palette, it's kind of proto Tim Burton. But definitely the Tim Burton element is the score. It's distinct. It's that distinct Danny Elfman score. And Paul Reubens actually talked Danny Elfman into doing the score for this movie because up to this point, Danny Elfman hadn't done any scores, but Paul Reubens was a fan of Oinga Boinga and wanted him to do the music. And Danny Elfman was actually hesitant to do this because he has no formal music training, but Paul Reubens talked him into doing the score. And you could very well argue that Paul Reubens is responsible for that Danny Elfman Tim Burton collaboration that would continue for decades, and is such an important component. Of Tim Burton's movies. So this movie was made on a $4 million budget, and it made about $41 million back. So it was a very, very successful, $7 million budget, $7 million budget, and made about just under $41 million back. So it was a successful movie. If you look at the movie, there's a whole bunch of cameos in it. Elvira is in the movie. Elizabeth Daily, who's known for doing is known for voice acting. So Elizabeth Daily plays the character Dottie, and when I watched this movie as a kid, I thought Dottie was very annoying. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And I watched this as an adult, and I'm just like, Pee-wee, what is wrong with you, dude? It's Elizabeth Daily. What are you doing there? Anyway, it's got James Brolin. Let's see here, Morgan Fairchild. They both have cameos. So you watch this movie. Like I said, Phil Hartman has a cameo in it. There's a few other people you'll recognize watching this movie. So about the writing of the movies, apparently originally Paul Reubens was going to write kind of a remake of Pollyanna using the Pee Wee Herman character. He was working for Warner Brothers as a writer, so he's on the studio, and he goes to Warner Brothers. He noticed that everybody's riding these bicycles on the studio, and he goes to Warner Brothers. He says, "Hey, where do people get these bicycles from?" So they give him a Schwinn, like a vintage style Schwinn, I guess. And he's like, "Oh, okay. I'm throwing away, this Pollyanna remake, and I'm going to do kind of a parody of the 1948 Italian film The Bicycle Thief." So that was the inspiration of the movie. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Pee Wee Herman character and just a little bit about Paul Reubens. So the Pee Wee Herman character was actually Paul Reubens developed it in 1977 when he was a member of the Groundlings comedy troupe. And that's also where he met Phil Hartman, and they were given the assignment to basically come up with an original character. And Paul Reubens was his idea, inspiration was to create a comedian who would be destined to fail, and that was Pee Wee Herman. So he would perform this character, Pee Wee Herman, a few times. In 1980, he was in the Cheech and Chong movie, Cheech and Chong's next movie. It's not the Pee Wee Herman that you later see in the Pee Wee Herman Show or Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure, but you can see elements of Pee Wee Herman. He does the catchphrase, I know you are, but what am I? But this Pee Wee Herman is a lot more vulgar and crass. Anyway, so then in 1981, he debuted the Pee Wee Herman Show, which was this adult kind of comedy show where it was a parody of 50s and 60s style children's show. So he had an adult version of the show. He had a kind of a more kid-friendly version of the show, and it was recorded and actually it did pretty well. It was actually released on HBO, and I remember seeing this not long after I saw the movie. So, which by the way, I saw the movie in theaters in 1986. I remember very distinctly. I saw it the same weekend I saw Back to the Future. So anyway, the movie comes out in '86. He has Pee Wee Herman's Pee Wee's Playhouse, which runs from 1986 to 1990 on CBS. Very successful. CBS had a lot of faith in this show. Every episode had a budget of $365,000, which was about the budget of a primetime sitcom. It won, I want to say it won 15 Emmys. And if you watch it, there'll be some people you recognize. Phil Hartman was in the first season. A young Natasha Lyonne was in the first season, playing one of the three children who hang out with Pee Wee, and Lawrence Fishburne as Cowboy Curtis, and he's got a jerry curl. It's kind of awesome. So that show runs from '86 to 1990. In 1988, Big Top Pee Wee comes out. It's not directed by Tim Burton. It doesn't have the same writers as Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure. Danny Elfman does do the score. It does not do nearly as well financially. It's actually a financial bomb. It was made on a budget of $20 million, and it only made a little bit over $15 million back. I've seen that movie a lot. I did not like it nearly as much as Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure as a kid, but I watched it a lot. I think a large reason I watched it because it had the actress Valeria Clino, Italian actress. She was in Rain Man. Yeah, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old me. Even then, I was like, this woman is beautiful. I had a bit of a crush on her. I did not see that one in the theaters, but I saw it a bunch on HBO. And then the last time that the Pee Wee Herman character would be in a feature film would be Pee Wee's Holiday. I think it says Pee Wee's Holiday in 2016, a Netflix release. Okay, so I'm not going to really get much into Paul Reubens' life. If you look at his filmography and the television shows, it is extensive, going back to the 70s up till 2019. He was in a ton of movies, a ton of television shows, Meatballs, Midnight Madness, Batman Returns, Mystery Men, Blow. His career was derailed by an incident that happened to him in 1990. I think it was in 1990. I don't want to talk about, well, I guess I'll say a little bit. I'm here in front of a camera. So basically what happened is he got caught pleasuring himself in an adult theater, which I think even it was like a huge joke. Like every late night show, every comedy show, is making fun of it. I remember at the time we used to watch In Living Color a lot, and there was like the sketch where they're making fun of it. And I think even at the time, I know this is weird, I think even at the time 10-year-old me was like, well, you're sitting in a movie theater where you're watching naked people do stuff. What else are you supposed to be doing? I know 10-year-old couldn't have been thinking that, but I swear 10-year-old me was thinking that. Fortunately, that wasn't the first time Paul Reubens had gotten in trouble with an adult film theater. I think he had been arrested about almost 20 years earlier for loitering in a theater. So, and about 10 years after that, 1990, I think around 2000, he got caught with material which was arguably, let's just say, inappropriate material involving children. He said that it wasn't that it was a type of erotica which wasn't illegal, and that it was basically being misinterpreted as another thing. I couldn't find the exacts on these. I did find information on what happened to him after he got arrested in 1990. He had to do probation. He did this drug commercial. He tried, whatever. I don't really want to talk much about that. The only reason I guess I'm mentioning that stuff because I do want to mention the incident in 2000 of him possibly having the child material, even though he did have consequences for that. He had probation. He had to register with the county sheriff he lived in, and he wasn't allowed to be around minors without their parents' consent. because I don't know much about it, I'm not going to say anything else about it. I'm not trying to defend them. I'm not one of these people who say, oh, because I like somebody or I like their work, they can do no wrong. There could be real victims involved, but I'm not sure. So I'm mentioning it because if there were victims, then it should be known. So that's really, I have not much else to say about that. Like I said, these movies or the movie Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure did mean a lot to me as a kid. I guess maybe because he's kind of a weirdo and an oddball, and I probably always felt like a bit of a weirdo and an oddball too. I think Paul Reubens. I think Paul Reubens is a very interesting guy, and I'll kind of end it with this. So when you see the Pee Wee Herman's character, he's effeminate. He's kind of a wuss, but he's kind of a shameless wuss, and he knows it, and he doesn't seem to care, and he's kind of a man baby who refuses to grow up. But there's oddly, strangely enough, there's something kind of admirable about that, of having all the pressure of society to conform to be a certain thing and refusing to, and unabashedly being yourself. And I do get the impression that Paul Reubens was maybe a lonely person, maybe kind of complicated, misunderstood. And I do think that although essentially the Pee Wee Herman character could be thought of as basically a clown. I mean, he wears white makeup and has red lips. So not only is he act like a clown, but he kind of appears kind of clownish. I do think there are a lot more elements of Paul Reubens in that character than we probably know. One thing I always thought would be interesting because of their sensibilities, I think they would match, is if John Waters and Paul Reubens had worked on a movie or worked on a project together using this character. John Waters, the way he kind of has this lens of, normal American, kind of seeing it for what it is. And in Pee Wee Herman, and then the kind of the assortment of oddballs around him, kind of even reflecting that kind of weirdo element of America. But that never happened. So, but there's a lot more to say about Paul Reubens. There's a lot more to say about Pee Wee Herman. If you get the chance to read up on him. But I'm just going to leave it at that. And no matter what he did, the good or bad, I guess I can't be sure of, and maybe we'll never be completely sure. I have to say undeniably that Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure was a big deal to me growing up and as a kid. Anyway.